Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around I've got a couple of things for you. One's a kaiju movie. I'm going to talk about that one first. Then I'm going to talk about a 1968 television movie which was done as a play in the UK, which foreshadowed and in a sense predicted the curse that is reality television. But let's get started with the movie I watched today down at the cinema. A little piece of work called Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire. It's a 2024 monster movie directed by Adam Wingard, produced by Legendary Pictures, and it's the fifth movie in the Monsterverse series. I'll give you the other ones just so you can stay up to date. The first one was Godzilla in 2014. Godzilla Kong Island came out in 2017. Godzilla King of the Monsters in 2019. Godzilla vs. Kong in 2021. And this one came out this year. There was also an Apple TV series called Monarch Legacy of Monsters, which starred Kurt Russell among other people, and wasn't too bad. I didn't mind that. And there was also an animated series called Skull Island on Netflix, which I haven't seen. I'm always up for a kaiju movie, but the problem with Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire, which I'm going to call Godzilla times Kong, is that it came out about a year after the best Godzilla movie of the 21st century, Godzilla Minus One. Made on a $20 million budget, Godzilla Minus One is the benchmark these days for a kaiju movie. Godzilla Minus One had a budget, as I said, of $20 million. The budget on this one's $135 million. So you could have made, he said, doing a rough calculation, 6 or 7 Godzilla Minus Ones for the price of this one. But this one had Weta Workshop working on it. There are enormous amounts of effects shots in the film, so I can see where the money is. But you kind of got to let go of the memory of Godzilla Minus One to enjoy Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire. Movie set 3 years after the last one. Things have settled down. You've got the Hollow Earth where Kong lives, along with a whole bunch of other monsters of various kinds. And you've got Godzilla on the surface taking care of all of the titans who rule the Earth, even though human beings used to think they did. Godzilla kills a monster called Skylar in Rome and decides to use the Colosseum as a nest and falls asleep in the Colosseum. Because of course you do. But a previously unknown signal starts turning up from Hollow Earth and nobody knows what it is. And so an investigation starts, a team is put together, they travel through the portals into the Hollow Earth to find out what's going on there because it's messing things up and it is dangerous. And what they find is that new areas of the Hollow Earth have opened up and that Kong is not the last of his species. There are other giant apes, including a really nasty one called Scar King, which has the control over a kaiju which could potentially freeze the Earth. Now the cast has a lot of returning characters and one new one. Rebecca Hall's back as Dr. Eileen Andrews, who is the foster mother of the last survivor of the people of Skull Island, a young girl called Gia, played by Kaylee Hoddle, who's a deaf actress. You got Brian Tyree Henry coming back as Bernie, who is a conspiracy theorist who has a podcast and who is really into the kaiju thing. Even though they don't call them kaijus, they call them titans in this particular universe. You got a new character called Trapper, played by Dan Stevens, who has a lot of fun in his role. We first see him when Kong comes up through the portal to the surface of Earth. Because he has a toothache, one of his incisors is giving him a lot of shit, and so Trapper comes down and when they sedate Kong, basically gives him a prosthetic tooth. You gotta love that. I mean, there's a certain audacity to doing dental surgery on Kong. Kind of like that part. None of this is spoilers. I'm not going to give you spoilers of all the little secrets that are down in the center of the Earth, in the Hollow Earth. But the humans go down there, they start investigating, but the humans are kind of marginal to this kind of a movie. What people pay their money to see in this kind of a film is giant monsters beating the crap out of each other. And you do get a boss battle at the end where 5 of them go head to head. Yeah, there's some really great stuff in here. The big boss battle takes place off the coast of and on the land of Rio de Janeiro. And there's a lot of ruined real estate in Rio by the time this thing finishes. So the question comes up, of course, is the movie any good or not? Is it worth checking out? For me, it'd probably be see it on streaming rather than see it in the cinemas. We did go to see it at Reading cinemas, so we got into the posh cinemas at Readings with the reclining seats, which is called, oddly enough, Titan Luxe. It's got a beautiful Dolby Atmos sound system, really big cinema, reclining seats, everything you can possibly want there. Having said that, it's probably see it on streaming. A couple of reasons why. If you haven't seen all the previous ones, you're going to be on a learning curve to work out what the hell's going on and who these people are and why Kong isn't grabbing Fei Ray and instead is living down in the Hollow Earth with an enormous axe. You've got to have your backstory, so there's homework to do if you want to really enjoy this film. I've seen all the previous Monsterverse stuff except for the animated series. So even then I kind of went, oh yeah, that part was part of that previous movie, and that's who that person is. There's a lot of catching up if you've seen the movies before, but if you haven't, you're going to be definitely on a steep learning curve, and you may not even enjoy the movie as much as you would had it just been a standalone giant monster movie. This isn't to say it's bad. It's not. It's a great piece of work. Some of the special effects are slightly dodgy. The bit where Kong fights Tiamat underneath the Arctic ice cap is very sketchy, and it gives me the impression that maybe they didn't have time to do the special effects to the degree of sophistication that they wanted to do them. These things take a long time and require a lot of people and a lot of work, and there's usually a very tight timeline to get the effects right. But the major battles are done very well. The evocation of the Hollow Earth is done really well. The facial expressions and all the motion capture they did for Kong really works. Kong is a strong presence in this movie, and that's particularly noticeable when he finds the other people of his species, or the other giant apes of his species, communicates with them and finds out about Scar King, confronts Scar King, and gets pretty badly injured in doing so on their first encounter. All of that's done, of course, without dialogue, but because of the reaction shots and because of how good the special effects are, we understand quite clearly what's going on. And it shows that with the level of effects that we have now, aided by motion capture of real human beings, you can tell quite a sophisticated story without dialogue. I kind of like that direction for things in the future to go. I can see the potential perhaps of doing, say, a movie set on an alien planet where there is no dialogue, and yet we know quite easily what's going on. This also happens a bit with the iwi people we find. There are more of the iwi people who were on Skull Island, tiny spoiler there. And the telepathic. We don't get any of that voiceover telepathic stuff. They just are, and we never hear what they're saying, or we never directly find out what they're saying. We only get a second hand from people who can hear them and understand them. But that's done very well. Adam Wingard, the director, does top work in conveying non-verbal information that various characters, both human and non-human, convey in this movie. But again, it suffers in comparison with Godzilla -1. And that's unfortunate because I don't think it's a bad movie. It's a nice popcorn movie, and it came out in school holidays here. And there are a bunch of kids down on their lower tier seats at the cinema having a good time with it and just enjoying themselves. And that's unfortunate because the movie was in production when they saw the trailer for Godzilla -1, and I'm sure there were any number of the people involved in the production of this movie going, oh shit, what are we going to do now? But they persevered, put out their own thing, and comparing it to Godzilla -1 I think is a little bit unfair. Yes, it does have one of the same characters. It's a very different kind of movie and it tells a different kind of story, whereas this one is more a roller coaster ride, action adventure film with some quirky human characters and a whole bunch of stuff, some of which we haven't seen giant kaiju do before. So you might want to check that one out if you get the opportunity. But I've still got the taste of how impactful Godzilla -1 was for me while I was watching this one. It diminished the enjoyment I might have had for it, just that tiny bit. That then takes us to Nigel Kneale's The Year of the Sex Olympics from 1968.
This is the year of the Sex Olympics, yeah!
You know how every time I do a video, there are people who come into the comments and say they couldn't make this one these days. This is definitely the case with the Year of the Sex Olympics, a 1968 television play done for the BBC by Nigel Kneale. It was part of a series called Theatre 625, and it was actually in the 5th season of this, so it was quite popular. Theatre 625, which is a television drama, kind of anthology series. It went from 1964 to 1968. But the reason that the year of the Sex Olympics couldn't be made now is the Olympics had sued them. The Olympics look after their intellectual property really tightly. And the modified Olympic rings that we see in this movie would not be permitted in a modern context because they look after their brand so assiduously. Now, Nigel Kneale had a real problem with the 1960s. He, of course, had done the Quatermass movies and, of course, the BBC serials as well, and a number of other things as well, including things like The Abominable Snowman of the Himalaya and a number of other fine works. Quatermass and the Pit, Quatermass 2. But Kneale had real problems with the 1960s. He got the idea for this particular play. He actually said it came from worldwide dread of populations exploding out of all control. And so he created a scenario for the play on using pornography as a substitute for sex rather than the real thing, and so keeping the population down. Now, having said that, pornography is ubiquitous now, and I don't think it's particularly effective as a deterrent from sex. It's interesting that the assumption was made then that in some ways it would dissuade people from procreating, or at least going through the motions of procreating. And Nigel Kneale also said, I didn't like the 60s at all because of the whole thing of let it all hang out and let's stop thinking. Now, I don't think that was ever part of the 60s. He also said, which is the all too frequent theme of the 60s, which I hated. So he hated the permissiveness and the opening up of society that the 1960s had. And he rolled that theme into this particular play. The plot's fairly simple. In the future, society is divided into two groups, the low drives, which are the lower class people, of course, and the high drives who control government and the media. I'm kind of paraphrasing from Wikipedia here. The low drives get controlled by constant broadcast of pornography that the high drives convinced will pacify them. That the high drives are convinced will pacify them.
They found that if they screened everything and screened it real king style, then basically the audience would make do with in place of the real thing. Take all experiences secondhand, just sit watching calmly and quietly.
Watch, not do.
Mm-hmm. Watch, not do, that's it.
One of the high drive people, a character called Nat Mender, played by Tony Vogel, thinks that the media should be used to educate the low drives. He is the outlier. He is the guy who is learning that the world he lives in and the way the world is not the ideal way for the world to be. This education process of Nat is also enhanced by the fact that he meets a rebel who, rather than just having moving images on television, has actually started drawing images, and he draws some very gruesome faces and some confronting images which have a profound effect on the people in this society who see them. They get blown away by the emotional impact of the art, even though it is quite crude. For them, it's something they've never seen. The anguish that this creative person puts into their art and into the faces he draws deeply emotionally affects the people who see it. And of course, this ends up with him being chased by the authorities and accidentally killed on screen. And one of the things that the hard drives find out from this death on the screen is the audiences are really emotionally engaged with the violence of that death. The ratings skyrocket. The sample audience they've got sitting on benches really love the unexpectedness and the randomness and the unpredictability of this stuff. It hits them a lot harder than the various sexualized programs that television has, and also the very, very broadly slapstick humor they put into the humor shows on this ubiquitous television network. This starts the characters thinking. The coordinator of the whole television is a character called Hugo Priest, played by Leonard Rossiter, and this character is an older person who remembers the way it was before the world was like this. He's the only person that remembers when language was a lot more complex, and there's a very simplified language used in this play, where most of the sentences are 3 words long, and people have trouble expressing themselves effectively if they veer into talking about emotions and feelings and anything outside the norm. One of the other programmers on this particular television network, who is part of the Sex Olympics show, which is called Sports Sex. There's also Art Sex, but there is a competitive thing called Sports Sex, which is preparing for the Sex Olympics of the year, where couples compete to make love in a competitive manner. I'm not sure exactly how you measure these kind of things, and we never find out because it is 1960s English television after all, and they're only going to go a certain distance in explaining and showing certain things. One of the other people running this is a character called Laser Opie, played by a very young Brian Cox. Opie is very much a company man. He likes what he sees. He is imaginative. He's ambitious. He wants things to go well, and he never questions any of it. So based on this death that happens and the spike in the ratings, Ugo Priest decides to create a new TV show, which Nat helps him create and helps him think up the idea for, which is to make a TV reality show where people live like they did in the old times. No contact with the outside world, no contact with anyone else forever. And they will be watched by the crowd. They will be watched by the masses as they live their lives in this isolated island, which looks like it's off the coast of Scotland. They grow their own food. They live their own life. They deal with things, life, death, whatever comes. And the show is created called the Live Life Show. And the plan is for these people to live on this island, which has a kind of cottage, like a Scottish croft. And they have some sheep on the island, and there's access to the water so they can get fish and things. They have information for 6 months on how to grow food and how to do things like start a fire, which nobody even knows what fire is in this world, and grow food and understand other things they need to know to survive. Nat decides he is going to be the person who goes on this island, along with his partner Deanie, played by Suzanne Neve, and their daughter Ketan, who is a young girl. So the three of them are dumped on this island, and a reality television show starts. It's a rating success. But what nobody, including Ugo Priest, knows is that Laser Opie has added a wild card into it. There's a man and a woman living on the island, and the man is probably a psychopath. His character called Grells, played by George Mersel, who has always lived on the island. And he's there with his woman. Things start going in a very dark way as this happens. And it leads to, let's just say, unforeseen circumstances and unforeseen consequences. This, of course, being a Nigel Kneale production, there is a really heavy impact at the end of it. And it's a really good one too. And it focuses as much as anything else on Ugo Priest's reaction to what goes on this reality TV show, while Laser Opie just sits back and enjoys the fact that it's going to be incredibly popular. This is good television. This is particularly good 1960s television. This is far beyond anything that the Americans would have produced in 1968 when they were still dicking around with Star Trek. Television about ideas, even if Nigel Kneale had that hatred of modern youth culture in the 1960s. He's still got some important stuff to say here. People have said that this created reality television, and you can make a reasonable argument for that. One of the early things created in reality television was a thing called Castaway, where people were put onto an island with very little resources, and there are still series to this day which play along the same lines about people put into remote circumstances with very little in the way of resources, and they've got to survive and thrive for as long as possible. And that voyeurism about the misery of other people is a strong thread through current media. I mean, here in Australia, things like Married at First Sight and The Bachelor and The Bachelorette are incredibly popular. And even really intelligent people and very educated people watch it almost religiously because they enjoy the stupidity and the discomfort that people on those series inevitably have. And the world building is pretty interesting as well. I mean, the use of language is really on point, and it tells us a lot about the world in which these people live. And there are things like there's a game called Auto Chess, where basically you put in a little programming chip into the top of a machine which has a chess set under glass, and the computer just plays chess by itself. There's no input after that for the people except to watch it. And there are dispensers of drugs all around these studios where the people are making these programs, which are kind of white tubes with some kind of fluid in them, and a little thing like a baby bottle nipple on the top of it, and you just suck the drugs to get whatever mood you want, elevators or to bring you down a bit. And they're used in the same way in 1960s context as cigarettes were. Ubiquitous drug that alters people's moods, except this one's in the shape of a kind of elongated baby bottle, which again gives us that sense of the infantilization of society as it is in this world. You shouldn't look too closely at whether this world will work in any meaningful way, because people just don't operate in the way that Nigel Kneale posits they will in this future world he creates. Men wear longer hair, often in a ponytail. The clothing tends to be things like paisley pattern cloth. The men wear basically skirts. Nobody's wearing trousers. They wear shin-high boots. It's a kind of extrapolation on Carnaby Street fashion of the 1960s into a future, and it's quite valid to do that. The hairstyles and the makeup of women are very exaggerated, and the presenters' style as they present these shows is an exaggeration of Top of the Pops kind of 1960s TV presenters for programming for young people. There is a lot of world building that works in this, and the themes are pretty obvious too. There are things about how viral sensationalist television is of any kind, whether it's a live news broadcast about something or it's something artificially created. Bums get on seats and people talk about this stuff between them and are really emotionally invested in it as well, a phenomenon which is only enhanced by the accessibility of social media. One of the other themes that underlies it is how the censorship of education and the diminution of education of the masses can lead to monstrous outcomes and can lead to unintended outcomes by the people who tend to not want people to be enlightened and educated. I mean, this is showing in America with the Trump phenomenon, for instance. The less you educate people, the more they will become monsters. And the television movie does show us that. Then you've got the class thing as well. The low drivers are obviously working class people. And there's that middle class idea that Nigel Kneale, being a person from a middle class background, has. The working class people aren't sophisticated and aren't able to create art and aren't able to think for themselves. There's always that these people must be led kind of underlying philosophy in what he's giving us. And he's also got that conceit that only the low drive people, only the people of the working class are going to enjoy certain kinds of entertainment, which is not true at all. Even in the 1960s, broad comedy on television was beloved by some very sophisticated and intelligent people. They could appreciate it at the level it was. And Nigel Kneale doesn't seem to have any acknowledgement or recognition of this. In some ways, he was a very unsophisticated person who is stuck in that right at the middle of the 20th century headspace and wasn't able to see past his own preconceptions about how the world should be. But the Year of the Sex Olympics is a really fine piece of work. It gave us an interesting world. It gave us our first glimpse at Brian Cox, because prior to this he'd only done repertory theatre in the UK, and then suddenly he comes on here, and you can tell by the way he commands the camera that he was going to go on to better things. And seeing young Brian Cox with the confidence and the bravado of youth was really interesting. The first time I saw him in anything really would have been him playing Hannibal Lecter in Manhunter. But you can see why people regard him so highly as an actor these days. It was all there from the start, and he only honed the craft from there. So there you go, there's the two science fiction things. First off, you've got a monster movie of not a lot of complexity. Then you've got a television movie from the 1960s, which has a lot of complexity and shows not only the dangers and the perils of unsophisticated television, but also the limitations of the man who created it and the way he couldn't see the potential of freeing up society in the 1960s. Really interesting stuff. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. You can support the channel by becoming a channel member or by becoming one of the wonderful patrons at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Monday's video is going to be a live stream, and I will post when the live stream's on. I've got a bit of a haul going there. I've got a lot of other things I want to talk about in media and in television in particular, and also movies. So until then, watch some good movies, watch some good old television plays, because there is a cornucopia of riches if you look around and find these things, mostly on YouTube, but you can find them in other places. And the Year of the Sex Olympics was also released on DVD by the BFI. So find that stuff and really enjoy really fine acting, really fine writing from the past. And I'll catch you next time.
This is the year of the Sex Olympics. Sex Olympics.